What we have is, helium is a rare, critical raw material, mostly unsubstitutable in its applications these days. And the reason it's unsubstitutable is because it's so expensive. It's 50 times more valuable than LNG. It has a very insecure supply chain, but we have what we think is the best untested helium system on the planet, with a mean prospective resource that would be 5 times the size of what is now the depleted US federal helium reserve. The people behind this, we have a lot of experience in the East African Rift system. We're targeting a play that has a 100% success rate in the East African Rift, which I played a key role in back in 2006 with Hardman Resources. And we're now planning on using those learnings for helium in another rift basin in Tanzania. Currently, we can push through the valuation side of things. We've got we've been working on this now for 7 years. We're now at the pointy end. We've secured our rig. We're just going through the final stages of our farm out to fund our high impact wells in Q3. And shortly we'll be announcing our rig contract and getting ready to mobilize the rig into Tanzania. Next slide, please. So why helium? Next slide. So most of us think of helium as party balloon filler, and I certainly did 7 years ago. Helium is critical in the functioning of MRI machines. About 20% of the world's helium goes into those. Semiconductors these days, so the manufacture of the chips in our phones and TVs, computers, etc., and cars. 15 years ago, none of that needed helium. Now it needs about 20% of the world's helium supply, and growing at a very high rate, as you can expect from semiconductor growth. Also, fiber optic cables can't be made without helium. So between semiconductors and fiber optics, helium actually underpins basically the entire global telecommunications system. It's also important for aerospace. It's about 8% of the world's helium goes into launching rockets. And we've actually had emails from SpaceX asking when our helium supply is coming online, because there's a critical shortage of it. And there's a host of other high-end specialist welding, other uses, research facilities, etc. Next slide, please. But the helium supply, for the last 100 years, most of the world's helium came out of the US. But as the US has depleted in helium, and specifically the depletion of the US Federal Reserve, which ran out in 2019, the other players have come into the market, so specifically Qatar, Russia, and Algeria. But by the middle to end of this decade, we expect those 3 countries to control about 70%, 60 to 70% of the world's helium supply. When we first started with Noble Helium, we didn't think that was a particularly good position to be for such a critical raw material. And we opportunity to diversify the global supply chain with what we think is the world's best untested helium system. As we've progressed, we've just watched the helium price climb as we've moved away from US Federal Reserve pricing of sort of $100 an MCF. Now that we're transitioning into market pricing, we're seeing sort of average prices, long-term tier 1 supply contracts, 400 plus US dollars per 1,000 cubic feet. That's 50 times the price of LNG, from a very similar cost base to find it and produce it. Next slide. So, as I said, 50 times the price of LNG. So, this is an oil and gas exploration project, which I've been in for nearly 30 years now in my career, and we're applying leveraging all of the technology of oil and gas exploration, but just applying it to a much more valuable commodity. So, if you're in an oil and gas company, a 6 BCF gas field, you'd ignore it. Too small to ever develop. Whereas with helium, 6 BCF is an absolute company maker for us. Our aim is to produce up to 900 million cubic feet per annum. So capture about 10 to 15% of the market. And it's a primary helium that is only associated with nitrogen, which makes it also a green helium. So it's not associated with natural gas, which 95% of the world's helium does come from. Next slide, please. So we have 4 key projects, 4 core areas in Tanzania. It's not just us saying this is the best untested helium acreage on the planet. Our professors at Oxford and Durham University agree, and they built us an atlas that have demonstrated the potential for this geological phenomena in Tanzania. We've got helium coming out of the ground at up to 18% in hot springs. Commercial cutoff in the US is 0.3% helium, so extremely high grade. I was with Hardman Resources years ago and drove the project in Uganda in the East African Rift system that opened up the East African Rift for oil and gas exploration. A lot of knowledge has been built up in the billions of dollars that have been spent since, and we're just applying that now to the Rookwood Basin, where instead of oil seeps all around the rim of the basin, we've got helium all around the rims around the basin. We know that there's a lot of helium there. So we have a farm out underway to fund our wells. We're getting ready to drill now. We just completed a very extensive oil and gas based exploration program over the last 12 months. Next slide. So there's our 4 project areas: North Rukwa, Yasi, Manyara, and North Nyasa. Our focus area at the moment is North Rukwa, and I'll explain a bit about that in a second. But the real the reason Tanzania is so prospective, and why Chris Ballantyne calls this helium release on steroids, is that Chris Ballantyne, Chair of Geochemistry at Oxford University, I should say, is that the generation of helium on our planet is through the radioactive decay of uranium and thorium. Every time those radioactive elements decay, there's a helium nucleus spat out into the interstitial fluids and crystal lattice surrounding it. And 2 to 3 billion years, and with uranium's half-life of 4.5 billion years, that builds up quite an inventory of helium in that crust. What's unique about Tanzania is that continental craton is now caught up in the East African Rift system. So the fracturing and heating is releasing that helium from deep in the crust and making its way to surface. And that's why we're seeing all of these hot springs and helium-saturated fluids. We've got 5,500 square kilometres under license, and we think we've pinned down the best parts of the best untested helium system on the planet. Next slide, please. These are our 10 leads and prospects in the Rookwood Project in southwest Tanzania. Collectively, these account for about 176 billion cubic feet of helium. Now, remember that 6 BCF is a company maker. There's a very significant resource potential in the Rookwood, and it's only associated with nitrogen from what we're seeing so far. Collectively, this could be the Rookwood Basin alone has the potential to be the world's 3rd largest helium reserve, behind the US and Qatar, and the largest primary green helium reserve, meaning that we can produce the helium for the helium's sake. It's not a byproduct of natural gas. So it provides a lot of flexibility to what is virtually a just-in-time delivery system of helium around the planet now for all of the chip manufacturing, MRI functioning, rockets. Everything is a very short buffer with no room for error in supply. Next slide, please. So we're now getting ready to drill. We engaged a really good drilling team last year. The guys that actually drilled, or the drilling project manager that drilled wells for me in Uganda and very successfully drilled the 2 opening wells in Uganda. He's now heading up our drilling program in Tanzania. We're targeting a play type where the sediments are actually trapped up against the edge of the fault. So this is a cutaway looking at the Mbalele and Pigeri that are about to be drilled. Why that's important is this is the play type that I used to open the rift system back in 2006. And 14 of these wells this play type have now been drilled in Uganda and in Kenya, and billions of dollars have been spent, and 14 discoveries from 14 wells of this play type. So we know that this play type is very effective in trapping oil and gas. All we have here in the Tanzanian rift basins is a different kind of gas. We are very encouraged by the work that we've done over the last 12 months. Just plugging away at the thesis that we've got helium in the subsurface. We've completed a charge modelling project with Oxford University, which is telling us that we should be seeing gas phase helium in high concentrations in this structure and structures to the south as well, actually. We've just completed 3D seismic and interpreted that. The seismic is A, proving that the structure's there, and B, we're seeing suggestions that there is gas trapped in the subsurface. And then final piece in the puzzle that we have helium anomalies in the soil gas, those yellow blobs there, that are more or less matching the shape of the structures that we're getting ready to drill. So we couldn't better positioned. Everything that we suspected how it would come together has actually come together exactly how we would have wanted it, and we can't wait to get drilling. Combined, these two structures are targeting a mean 16.5 BCF of helium, which is still only 10% of our North Rookwood portfolio. As I mentioned, we've got a farm out process which is coming to completion now. We've got our final bids due on the 26th of April. And that is very much driven by, those dates are hard. It's very much driven by our operational schedule. We are absolutely going to drill these wells. Everything's in place to do it. We've located the rig. We've secured it under an LOI. It's now being prepared in a yard in Tunisia, and will soon be shipped out after we've finalised the contract and shipped out to Tanzania. Next slide, please. So the timing on that, this is just what we've been doing over the last 12 months or so. 3D seismic, prior to that, soil gas surveys, airborne gravity gradiometry, engaged our drilling team. We've now finalised our drill targets. We've updated the resource for Balali, and we're about to put out an update for Katinga as well. The rig's now secured. Our neighbours, Helium One, we're working with them to bring the rig into country to save mobilisation costs. And they'll be drilling the Vastic drill first, which we're happy for them to do. And then we'll follow with our 2 high impact wells in the Rooka. Next slide, please. So if we're successful here, what do we do with it? Well, this is we're just going to do what the helium industry has done before. It's proven technology. We'll build a plant. That's off the shelf type technology. We've got blacktop road from 40 kilometres from our site all the way back to Dar es Salaam. So the road access is excellent. We've got direct access to the national power grid, which runs through our licenses, and we've got access to water. Of course, we're right next to Lake Rukwa. So if we were to achieve our ambition and build an 900 million cubic feet a year plant, yes, there'll be some capital expenditure over the next few years. But once we're running, OPEX is minimal, and we'll be producing somewhere around $350 to $450 million a year from this plant. Next slide. So what we have is a very strategic, critical raw material. Most people have never heard of, but it's the next big thing that nobody's heard of. It's got some very significant supply issues that we have an opportunity here to make a global impact in solving. Largest holding in the best untested helium system, and between Sean Scott, who ran Arrow Energy, from a $20 million company to a $3.5 billion takeout. And myself was with Hardman, and we proved oil in Uganda, and then our partner Tullow Oil bought us for $1.5 billion, and our drilling team and all of the fantastic brains that are sitting behind this company. I think everybody's in good hands. Thanks, Tim.
Thanks, Justyn. Quite a few questions here, and these people obviously know their stuff. Now, helium, you're right. I don't think the market understands helium well. Where there's been a lot more publicity lately is actually in Tanzania. The US Vice President was there the other day. Obviously, graphite's a big play in Tanzania. Where does helium sit in this kind of critical supply chain equation?
Yeah, so if we're correct here, this will absolutely put Tanzania front and center as a strategic as a global supplier of the strategic resource. And the Tanzanian government's very aware of this. I mean, we talk to them very regularly. We've got a really well-connected team in Tanzania. So this is a national interest project in Tanzania.
And can you talk us through the Safari drill rig, where you are in terms of this question here, expecting contracts to be signed on that, and has all the due diligence been done to ensure export licenses will be put in place?
Yeah, all of that has been done. We're well placed for that. It's just a matter of finalising the contract, and it's a standard AIDC contract, so we're not very far away from signing that.
And of course, helium is notoriously elusive and difficult to store, and I assume that means to transport. Can you talk us through that process and how you can manage those expectations?
Sure. Yeah. So obviously, it's the second smallest element, and they call it the Houdini gas. In Tanzania, we have a very unique, and we have the benefit of some old wells that were drilled in the 80s looking for oil. What we know is that the clay mineralogy in Tanzania in the Rookwood Basin is extremely good. We couldn't ask for better seal capacity in the subsurface. So it's an illite. There's a very high concentration of what's called illite smectite clay. Who, for the questioner, I think they might understand. But for the general public, it's the same clays that farmers use to line their dams for sealing them. That's very, very effective top seal. Once we liquefy the helium, it'll go into what's called an ISO container, which is it's cooled to minus 270 degrees. Then it's wrapped in a liquid nitrogen shield, and then that's sent off to market. And that's good for 45 days to get to market. So it's well contained once it's in those tankers.
I mean, you touched on SpaceX, and there's a question here. Logistically, you've got 40 to 45 days to get it there. Can that work if you're exporting to the US?
Look, SpaceX is asking us for helium. That's probably more of a reflection of how important helium is in their supply chain. Like, they can't launch rockets without it, and they're using it a lot of it. We probably could get some helium to the US, but likely our helium will be going into the Asian market, which is where the real demand growth is at the moment.
And just quickly, two more questions. Where does the Tanzanian government fit in this? Do they own a part of the project?
Yeah, so the Tanzanian government has always had a right to a free carried interest. A few years ago, President Magufuli defined that as 16%. So they will be a 16% shareholder in the development project as we roll forward. Free carried interest, but the margins on a product that is 50 times more valuable than LNG and a lot smaller in scale and costs, we can handle a 16% free carried interest.
And just finally, how's lithium priced?
Helium, you mean?
Sorry, I said lithium because I was thinking about lithium. It's kind of got some opaque pricing, and people jump on lithium as it moves. How's this relevant to helium?
Yeah, so there is no market index for helium. It is contract based. Usually long-term supply contracts kind of form the basis of a lot of the shorter term, higher value contracts. Fortunately, there are some people who have pretty good insights into those contracts and follow that closely. So we're closely connected to those people to keep track of what's going on. And the graph that I showed you is from one of those people. They have a very close association, a long association with the helium industry.
Thanks, Justyn. That's all we have time for. Fascinating story. Love to follow up later in the year.
Great. Yeah, happy to. Thanks, Tim. Appreciate it.
Thank you.